Targaryen has finally reached the point where there may be no way back. The war is no longer about who deserves the Iron Throne, because the throne itself has started destroying everyone who comes close to it. And if Season 4 follows the direction that Season 3 has already established, the death of Rhaenyra will not simply be another shocking moment in the Dance of the Dragons. It will completely change the future of House Targaryen, the fate of Westeros, and the way every surviving character sees the war. The most dangerous part is that the story has already been quietly preparing us for this ending. Rhaenyra has lost the relationship she once had with the people of King's Landing. The Greens are beginning to find their way back to each other, the dragons are becoming harder to control, and the political structure around both sides is collapsing piece by piece. So, with that being said, let's talk about why Rhaenyra's possible death in Season 4 could become the single most important event of the entire series, what it could mean for Aegon, Aemond, Daemon, Aegon III, and the surviving dragons, and why the Iron Throne itself may be the real enemy waiting at the end of this war. The first thing we need to understand is that Rhaenyra is entering Season 4 from a completely different position than the woman we met at the beginning of the story. She was once the young princess who believed that being named heir would give her a clear path toward the throne. She believed that if she could survive the political games, protect her family, and prove that she was capable of ruling, she could finally take the place that her father had promised her. But the war has slowly destroyed that version of Rhaenyra. Every loss has taken something from her. Every betrayal has made her more suspicious. Every death has pushed her closer to the idea that power is the only thing that can protect her. And now, when she looks at the people of King's Landing, she no longer sees the same city she once wanted to rule. She sees people who can turn against her at any moment. That change is extremely important because it means her final downfall does not have to come from one sudden mistake. It can come from the consequences of everything she has already done. The finale has already shown us the direction of that transformation. Rhaenyra's relationship with the small folk is effectively finished. The city has been suffering, fear has been spreading, and the people have watched powerful families fight over a chair while ordinary people pay the price. That is exactly the kind of environment where an uprising becomes possible, and when people stop believing that their ruler is protecting them, even the strongest army can become useless. This is why the future of King's Landing is going to be so important in Season 4. Rhaenyra may believe that taking the city means she has won an important part of the war, but controlling the city and controlling its people are two completely different things. The Iron Throne can be captured with an army, but it cannot be secured without loyalty, and Rhaenyra is slowly losing that loyalty. This is also where the story of the Dragon Pit becomes extremely important. The dragons have always been the greatest symbol of Targaryen power, but the Dance of the Dragons is showing us something very different. Dragons can win battles, destroy armies, and terrify entire cities, but they cannot solve the political problems created by their riders. In fact, the more the war depends on dragons, the more dangerous the consequences become. The people of Westeros are beginning to understand that these creatures are not simply symbols of royalty, they are weapons capable of changing the fate of thousands of people in a single moment. And once the people decide that the dragons themselves are part of the problem, the entire foundation of Targaryen power becomes vulnerable. That is why Rhaenyra's death would be much bigger than Rhaenyra simply losing a battle. Her death would represent the collapse of the idea that she could use the Iron Throne to finally create stability. She could spend years fighting for the throne, sacrifice family members, lose allies, destroy enemies, and still discover that the throne she wanted was never capable of giving her what she actually wanted. This is one of the darkest ideas inside the Dance of the Dragons. Everyone believes the throne is the prize, but the throne becomes a machine that keeps demanding another sacrifice. One person falls, another takes the seat, and the cycle continues. And this is where Aegon becomes extremely important. The Greens have spent so much time divided that it would have been easy to believe their cause was finished. But the ending has started rebuilding their position. Aegon arriving at Harrenhal and the possibility of reconciliation with Aemond changes the entire strategic picture. These two brothers have been moving through the war in completely different directions, but their reunion could create something that neither side wants to see: a renewed green threat. If Aegon and Aemond are able to operate together again, the Blacks can no longer assume that the Green cause has collapsed simply because its political structure has been damaged. The biggest question is what Aegon becomes after everything that has happened to him. He is no longer the same king who entered the war. His body has been damaged, his confidence has been shattered, and his relationship with power has changed completely. But sometimes a character who has lost almost everything becomes more dangerous because there is less left to lose. Aegon still has a claim. He still has the name Targaryen. And most importantly, Sunfire remains a symbol of his survival. If Aegon returns to the conflict with a new determination, Rhaenyra's position becomes much more dangerous. Then we have Aemond, and this is where the Green resurgence becomes even more threatening. Aemond has always represented the destructive side of the war. He has Vhagar, the largest and most terrifying dragon on the board, and he has repeatedly shown that he is willing to make decisions that other characters would hesitate to make. But Aemond's greatest weakness is also his ambition. He does not simply want the Greens to survive. He wants control, he wants recognition, and he wants to prove that he is capable of becoming the strongest figure in the family. If he and Aegon reunite, the alliance could be extremely unstable, but even an unstable alliance can be dangerous when both sides have dragons and a common enemy. And then there is Daeron, whose future could become another major piece of the Green resurgence. The war has already shown that the next generation of Targaryens is being forced to grow up inside a conflict created by their parents. These young characters are not simply watching the war. They are becoming part of it. Daeron has the blood, the dragon, and the legitimacy to become an important Green figure. But what makes his story interesting is that he is not presented simply as another version of Aemond. He has a different temperament and a different relationship with violence. That creates one of the biggest questions for Season 4. Can someone remain honorable inside a war that rewards cruelty? This question connects directly to the future of Rhaenyra's children. Because if Rhaenyra dies, the story does not simply end. The responsibility passes to the next generation, and that is where Aegon III becomes incredibly important. He is not just another Targaryen child waiting for the throne. He represents the consequences of everything his family has done. He is growing up while watching the people he loves disappear one after another. His understanding of kingship will be shaped not by stories about glory, but by trauma and destruction. And if he eventually becomes king, he will inherit a kingdom that has been broken by the very family that claims to protect it. This is why the title of Dragonbane becomes so powerful when we look at the bigger picture. The Targaryens built their power around dragons, but the dance is gradually turning that greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The war is consuming the dragons, the riders, and the political stability of the kingdom. By the time the fighting is over, the Targaryens may still have the Iron Throne, but they will no longer have the same power behind it. The Age of the Dragons is moving toward its final stage, and Rhaenyra's death would be one of the major steps in that collapse. But before that happens, we have to talk about the dragon riders who are becoming impossible to control. Ulf is one of the clearest examples. After Tumbleton, Silverwing is no longer simply another weapon that can be placed on a battlefield and pointed at the enemy. Ulf has his own motivations, his own anger, and his own reasons for refusing to fit neatly into the black or green side. That makes him extremely dangerous. A dragon without predictable loyalty is almost more frightening than an enemy dragon, because nobody knows where it will appear next. Hugh Hammer is in an even darker position. He has lost his wife and has been left with almost nothing except the dragon that made him important in the first place. A man who has lost his home, his family, and his sense of belonging can become extremely unpredictable. The show has already changed parts of his story compared with the source material, which means his future cannot simply be assumed. But one thing is clear: The dragon seeds have shown that giving ordinary people access to Targaryen-level power creates a problem the old royal family never expected. The dragons are no longer controlled only by kings and princes. They are now in the hands of people who have their own grudges, fears, ambitions, and personal reasons to fight. That completely changes the aerial balance heading into Season 4. Caraxes is still a major force, but the war has taken its toll. Vermithor's position has changed. Silverwing is unpredictable. Sunfire is alive but damaged. Vhagar remains the greatest immediate threat, but even Vhagar's future is connected to the instability of Aemond, and Tessarion represents another piece of the board that could become important as the Greens reorganize. Rhaenyra may look at the battlefield and still believe that the Blacks possess overwhelming power, but the reality is much more complicated. And this gap between belief and reality may be exactly what destroys her. Because Rhaenyra's biggest problem is not simply the enemy standing across from her, it is the fact that she may no longer understand how fragile her own position has become. A ruler surrounded by people who agree with everything she says can easily believe that the kingdom is stable. But when fear replaces loyalty, every silence becomes suspicious. Every missing soldier becomes a problem. Every rumor becomes a potential rebellion. And every death creates another family with a reason to hate the throne. This is why King's Landing could become the place where everything finally turns against Rhaenyra. The city has already been pushed toward chaos, and the political machinery underneath it is breaking down. Gold, rumors, fear, and anger are moving through the streets. The small folk do not care about the technical arguments over succession. They care about food, safety, and survival. When those things disappear, the identity of the king or queen becomes less important than the immediate question of who is responsible. And Rhaenyra is now sitting directly at the center of that anger. The tragedy is that she once wanted the people to accept her as their rightful queen. But the war has created a version of Rhaenyra who may no longer have the patience to earn their acceptance. She has become more willing to use fear, force, and death to protect her claim. That does not mean she suddenly became evil. It means the war has slowly convinced her that kindness is weakness and compromise is dangerous. That is exactly what makes her downfall more powerful. The character is not destroyed because she becomes someone completely different. She is destroyed because the worst parts of her become stronger every time the war takes something away from her. And this brings us to one of the most important questions for Season 4. What happens when Rhaenyra realizes that winning the throne is no longer enough? If she takes King's Landing and still cannot make the city love her, what has she actually won? If she defeats the Greens but loses her family, what is left? If she survives every enemy but loses the people closest to her, can she still call herself victorious? These are the questions that could define the final chapter of the dance. The story of Daemon also becomes critical here. Daemon has always been one of the few people capable of understanding Rhaenyra's hunger for power, because he shares many of the same instincts. But their relationship has also shown how dangerous it can be when two powerful people are connected by love, ambition, and fear at the same time. If Rhaenyra is moving toward a final confrontation, Daemon's choices could determine whether she survives long enough to reach it. His story has never been simply about fighting for the throne. It has been about deciding what kind of man he wants to be when the war gives him permission to become his worst self. And then there is Aemond on the opposite side. Aemond and Daemon are two characters who have been moving toward a collision for a long time. Both are shaped by family expectations. Both understand the power of fear. Both are connected to enormous dragons. And both have allowed the war to turn personal. That is why any confrontation between them carries consequences beyond a normal battle. It represents the old generation of Targaryen violence destroying itself, while the younger generation waits to inherit the ruins. But even if Aemond and Daemon destroy each other, the war will not stop. That is the most important thing to understand about this story. Removing one major character does not solve the conflict. The political machine continues moving. New people step into the empty positions. New alliances form. Old enemies become temporary allies, and the children who survive inherit the consequences. This is why Rhaenyra's death can change everything without actually ending the story. Her death would create a vacuum, and everyone remaining would immediately try to fill it. Aegon could become the symbol of green survival. Aegon III could become the symbol of black legitimacy. The surviving dragons could become the final weapons capable of deciding the conflict, and the small folk could become the force that neither side can completely control. That last part is extremely important. The Targaryens have spent the entire war behaving as though the kingdom belongs to them.